The muddy waters rose around her ankles as Sarah Beth Morrison strained against the rope that bound her to the weathered wooden stake. Above her storm clouds gathered like vultures, pregnant with the promise of a deluge that would surely claim her life within the hour. The townspeople of Copper Ridge had made their judgment swift and merciless. She was a witch, a poisoner of wells, a bringer of death. As the first fat raindrop struck her upturned face, mixing with tears she refused to shed, Sarah Beth whispered a prayer not for salvation, but for forgiveness for a crime she had never committed. The accusations had come like lightning on a clear day, sudden and devastating. 3 days prior, old Henrik Johansson had collapsed while drawing water from the community well, foam at his lips, his body convulsing in the dusty street. By evening 2 more had fallen ill, little Mercy Caldwell and the blacksmith's wife, Ruth. The pattern seemed clear to the frightened townspeople. Someone had poisoned their lifeline, their precious water source in this unforgiving desert territory. Dr. Edmund Thorne, the circuit doctor who happened to be passing through, had examined the victims with grim efficiency. His pronouncement fell like a death sentence. Arsenic poisoning, no doubt about it. Someone has deliberately contaminated your well. The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Sarah Beth had been tending to her small herb garden behind the boarding house when Marshal Wade Hutchins and 6 armed men came for her. The marshal's weathered face, usually kind when he tipped his hat to her on Sundays, was now set in hard lines of suspicion and disgust. "Sarah Beth Morrison," he said, his voice carrying the weight of judge and jury, "you're under arrest for the poisoning of the Copper Ridge well and the attempted murder of Henrik Johansson, Mercy Caldwell, and Ruth Brennan." The accusation hit her like a physical blow. "Marshal, you can't be serious. I would never. We found this in your room." He held up a small bottle of clear liquid, rat poison, arsenic. Sarah Beth's heart plummeted. She recognized the bottle. It belonged to Mrs. Henley, the boarding house owner, who had asked her to dispose of it weeks ago. In her busy schedule of tending to guests and maintaining the herb garden that supplemented her meager income, she had forgotten. The bottle had sat on her windowsill, a ticking time bomb of circumstantial evidence. "That's not mine," she protested, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Mrs. Henley asked me to." "Mrs. Henley died of consumption 3 weeks ago," Marshal Hutchins interrupted. "Convenient witness, wouldn't you say?" The crowd that had gathered murmured agreement, their faces twisted with fear and anger. These were people she had known for 3 years, people whose children she had cared for when they were sick, whose wounds she had dressed with her herbal remedies. Now they looked at her as if she were a rabid animal. The trial, if it could be called that, lasted less than an hour. Judge Cornelius Webb, a man more accustomed to settling cattle disputes than murder cases, presided over the proceedings in the saloon. The evidence was damning in its simplicity. Poison found in her room, her knowledge of herbs and mysterious concoctions, and the testimony of several townspeople who claimed they had always found her peculiar and too friendly with the Indians. That last accusation cut deepest of all. Sarah Beth had indeed befriended members of the Tohono O'odham tribe who occasionally passed through the area to trade. She had learned from them, traded herbs and remedies, and yes, she had given water to their warriors during the scorching summer months when other establishments turned them away. In the eyes of Copper Ridge, this made her not just peculiar, but dangerous. The verdict came as the sun set over the Red Mesa formations that surrounded their small town. Guilty of attempted murder and witchcraft. The sentence was death by drowning in the coming flood. "The Lord shall judge through the waters," Judge Webb intoned, his voice trembling with what he believed was righteous conviction. "If she is innocent, the waters will recede and spare her. If guilty, they shall claim her as surely as she tried to claim our people." It was a medieval sentence in a modern world, but frontier justice often had little use for modern sensibilities. They had bound her to a stake driven deep into the muddy bank of Copper Creek, just as their ancestors might have bound a witch to face trial by ordeal. The irony was not lost on her that they accused her of poisoning water, only to let water be her ultimate judge. The storm clouds had been building all day, promising the kind of flash flood that could turn the gentle creek into a raging torrent within minutes. Sarah Beth had seen it happen before. Peaceful streams becoming walls of destruction that could sweep away entire settlements. The desert held its water jealously, but when it finally let go, it did so with terrifying violence. As the first drops of rain began to fall more steadily, Sarah Beth closed her eyes and let her mind drift to happier times. She remembered the day she had first arrived in Copper Ridge, a young woman fleeing the suffocating expectations of her family back in Philadelphia. Her father had wanted her to marry well and produce grandchildren. Her mother had wanted her to be a perfect lady who never soiled her hands or spoke out of turn. But Sarah Beth had always been drawn to healing, to the mysteries of herbs and remedies that could ease suffering. The herb garden behind the boarding house had been her sanctuary. She had coaxed life from the stubborn desert soil, creating a small oasis of green in the endless brown. Chamomile for upset stomachs, willow bark for pain, echinacea for fighting infection. She had learned as much from the native people as from any book. They understood the desert's secrets in ways that the white settlers never could. She remembered Standing Bear, the Tohono O'odham warrior who had first taught her about desert medicines. He had been suspicious at first, as were most of his people when dealing with whites, but Sarah Beth had proven herself by successfully treating his young son's fever with a combination of traditional and indigenous remedies. After that, Standing Bear and others would stop by her garden when they passed through the area, sharing knowledge and accepting the water and food she offered freely. Water is life, Standing Bear had told her once, his English careful but clear. Those who share water share life itself. This is sacred thing. The memory brought fresh tears to her eyes as the rain began to fall harder. The creek was already rising, its normally placid surface beginning to churn with muddy runoff from the surrounding hills. She had perhaps an hour before the water reached her waist, maybe 2 before it reached her shoulders. After that, please, she whispered to the storm-darkened sky, let someone know the truth. Don't let me die as a murderer. The rain was falling in earnest now, each drop striking the parched earth with the violence of bullets. The sound was almost deafening as it struck the rocks and sparse vegetation around her. Through the curtain of water, she could see the lights of Copper Ridge flickering in the distance, warm and safe behind glass windows. Were they watching her, waiting for nature to carry out their sentence? The creek was rising faster now, lapping at her shins with increasing urgency. The current was stronger too, carrying debris from upstream, branches, leaves, and the occasional piece of wood from some unfortunate structure that had been in the water's path. Sarah Beth tested her bonds again, knowing it was hopeless but unable to stop herself from trying. The rope was expertly tied, the stake driven deep into the creek bed. Marshal Hutchins had been thorough in his execution of the court's sentence. As the water reached her knees, Sarah Beth found herself thinking about the real poisoner, who had actually contaminated the well. The thought that someone in Copper Ridge was willing to let her die for their crime filled her with a mixture of rage and profound sadness. She had given 3 years of her life to this community, had tended their sick, comforted their grieving, and celebrated their joys. Yet when fear took hold, all of that meant nothing. The sound of thunder rolled across the desert, so deep and powerful that she felt it in her bones. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the storm's impressive architecture. This was going to be more than just a flash flood. This was going to be a biblical deluge that would reshape the landscape for miles around. The water reached her thighs, and with it came the cold. Desert nights could be shockingly cold even in summer, and the storm-fed creek was like ice against her skin. Her teeth began to chatter, and she had to concentrate to keep from hyperventilating. Panic would not serve her now. If these were to be her final hours, she would face them with as much dignity as she could muster. I forgive you, she said aloud, though her words were swallowed by the storm. All of you, I forgive you. It was true, she realized. Despite everything, she could not find it in her heart to truly hate the people of Copper Ridge. They were frightened, and fear made people do terrible things. They genuinely believed they were protecting themselves and their families from a dangerous threat. The fact that they were wrong did not make their fear less real, or their love for their families less genuine. The water was at her waist now, and the current was becoming dangerous. She could feel the pull of it, trying to sweep her legs out from under her. If not for the rope holding her to the stake, she would already be tumbling downstream in the churning brown water. Several times, debris struck her legs, a branch here, a piece of cloth there, reminders of the flood's destructive power. She thought about her parents back in Philadelphia, who would never know what became of their wayward daughter. They had not spoken since she left, their final argument echoing in her memory like a funeral bell. Her father's words had been harsh. If you insist on this foolishness, Sarah Beth, then you are no daughter of mine. Her mother had wept but said nothing, trapped between her husband's anger and her love for her child. Perhaps it was better that they would never know the truth. Better that they imagine her living freely somewhere in the vast American West, than to learn she had died tied to a stake like a medieval heretic. The thought brought her a strange comfort. The water reached her chest, and with it came the realization that she had perhaps 20 minutes left. The stake was tall enough that the water would not reach her head for a while yet, but the cold was already sapping her strength. Even if the flood receded now, she might not survive the exposure. That was when she heard it, a sound that seemed impossible over the roar of the storm and the rushing water. Hoofbeats. Someone was riding hard through the flood, coming from upstream. Sarah Beth strained her eyes through the sheets of rain, trying to see who could be foolish enough to brave such conditions. Lightning illuminated the rider for just a moment, but it was enough. She saw a lone figure on horseback, bent low against the storm, moving with the kind of skill that spoke of a lifetime spent in harmony with both horse and harsh landscape. The rider's long black hair streamed behind him, and even through the rain and darkness, she recognized the proud bearing of Standing Bear. Her heart leaped with impossible hope. Was she hallucinating? Had the cold and fear finally driven her to madness? The rider was still 100 yards away, fighting against the current and rising water with determination that bordered on the supernatural. Standing Bear, she called out, though she knew her voice could not possibly carry over the storm. Here, I'm here. The rider's head turned in her direction, and she knew he had somehow heard her, or felt her presence the way the old ones claimed was possible between souls bound by shared kindness. Horse and rider plunged deeper into the flood, the water now reaching the animal's chest but the magnificent beast swimming with powerful strokes that carried them steadily forward. The water was at Sarah Beth's shoulders now, and she had to tilt her head back to keep her mouth and nose clear. Each small wave threatened to submerge her completely. Her hands, bound behind the stake, had long since gone numb from the cold and the tightrope. Standing Bear reached her just as the water touched her chin. Without hesitation, he slid from his horse's back into the churning flood, a knife already in his hand. The blade was sharp and true, slicing through the rope that bound her with 3 quick cuts. Sarah Beth felt herself falling forward as her support disappeared, but Standing Bear's strong arms caught her before the current could claim her. "Hold tight," he said in English, his voice somehow audible despite the chaos around them. "Horse knows the way." He lifted her onto the horse's back, then pulled himself up behind her. The animal, a beautiful paint mare with intelligent eyes, seemed to understand the urgency of their situation. Without prompting, she turned and began swimming toward higher ground, her powerful legs driving them through water that would have swept away any lesser mount. Sarah Beth found herself pressed against Standing Bear's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing and the warmth of his body cutting through the cold that had settled in her bones. She was alive. Against all odds, impossibly, she was alive. "Why?" she managed to ask through chattering teeth. "How did you know?" "Saw the smoke signals," he replied, guiding his horse with subtle shifts in his weight. "My people watch over the valley. We saw the white man's justice, knew it was wrong." He paused, and she felt rather than saw his slight smile. "Water Spirit told me where to find you." They reached dry ground just as the flood reached its peak. Behind them, the creek had become a raging river that would take days to recede. The stake where she had been bound was now completely submerged, lost beneath waters that carried the debris of civilization downstream toward some distant ocean. Standing Bear wrapped her in a thick blanket that smelled of sage and wood smoke, then built a small fire in the shelter of an overhanging rock. As warmth began to return to her body, Sarah Beth found herself studying her rescuer's face in the flickering light. He was perhaps 40 years old, with the kind of weathered dignity that spoke of a life lived in harmony with unforgiving land. His dark eyes held depths of wisdom and pain that she recognized in her own mirror. "The people of Copper Ridge think you are dead," he said, feeding small sticks to the growing fire. "This is good. Dead woman can start new life." Sarah Beth nodded, understanding the logic even as it broke her heart. She could never return to Copper Ridge, never clear her name or reclaim her old life. But she was alive, and that was more than she had dared hope for an hour ago. "What will I do?" she asked. "Where will I go?" Standing Bear was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of careful consideration. "My people have need of healing, woman," he said. "White man's sickness comes to reservation. Government doctors do not come. Children die." He looked at her directly, his gaze steady and serious. "You have good hands, good heart. My people would welcome such a one." The offer took her breath away. To live among the Tohono O'odham, to use her skills where they were desperately needed, to be part of a community that valued healing above suspicion, it was more than she had ever dreamed possible. "But I'm white," she protested. "Your people have every reason to distrust my kind. Color of skin matters less than color of heart." Standing Bear replied. "You gave water when others would not. You learned our ways with respect, not conquest. These things are remembered." As dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that seemed impossible after the violence of the storm, Sarah Beth Morrison made her choice. She would leave behind everything she had been and become something new. Not a white woman trying to survive in a hostile frontier town, but a healer serving people who understood the sacred nature of water, of life itself. The journey to the reservation took 3 days, during which Standing Bear shared stories of his people's traditions, their struggles with the encroaching white settlement, and their efforts to preserve their ancient ways in a rapidly changing world. Sarah Beth found herself falling in love, not just with the man who had saved her life, but with a way of seeing the world that valued community over individual gain, harmony over conquest, and healing over harm. When they arrived at the small cluster of traditional homes that made up Standing Bear's village, Sarah Beth was greeted with curious but welcoming faces. Word of her skills had preceded her, carried by the same network of signals and messengers that had alerted Standing Bear to her plight. Within hours of her arrival, she was tending to a child with fever, using a combination of her European knowledge and traditional remedies that the tribal elders shared freely. Over the following months, Sarah Beth became not just a healer, but a bridge between two worlds. She learned the Tohono O'odham language, participated in their ceremonies, and gradually came to understand that she had found something precious that she had never known she was seeking, a true home. Her relationship with Standing Bear deepened slowly, built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than the passionate but shallow attractions she had known in her previous life. They worked together, combining his knowledge of traditional medicine with her formal training to create healing practices that were more effective than either could have achieved alone. When they married in a ceremony that honored both his traditions and her Christian faith, Sarah Beth felt as though she had finally become the person she was always meant to be. No longer was she trying to fit into a world that saw her as odd or dangerous. She was valued for exactly who she was. Years passed. Sarah Beth, now known to the tribe as Water Woman in honor of her rescue and her gift for finding clean water sources, established a small clinic that served not only the reservation but also travelers passing through the desert. Her reputation as a healer spread throughout the territory, though she was careful to maintain her new identity and never venture too close to her old life. The irony was not lost on her that she had been condemned for poisoning water, only to become known for her ability to purify it and use it for healing. The false accusation that had nearly killed her had led her to her true calling. One autumn day, 7 years after her rescue, a familiar figure appeared at her clinic. Marshal Wade Hutchins, now graying and walking with a slight limp, stood in her doorway with his hat in his hands. For a moment, time seemed suspended as they looked at each other across the years and the vast distance of changed circumstances. "Sarah Beth Morrison," he said quietly. "I thought you were dead." "Sarah Beth Morrison is dead," she replied, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "I am Water Woman now." Hutchins nodded slowly, taking in her traditional dress, her sun-darkened skin, and the confident bearing of a woman who had found her place in the world. "I came to tell you," he said. "We found the real poisoner. It was Dr. Thorne, the circuit doctor. He was selling medicine made with arsenic, and he poisoned the well to cover his tracks when people started getting sick. He confessed on his deathbed 3 months ago. The revelation should have filled her with vindication, but instead Sarah Beth felt only sadness for the fear and hatred that had driven good people to terrible actions. "Will you tell them?" Hutchins asked. "Will you come back?" Sarah Beth looked past him to where Standing Bear was approaching, their 2 young children playing in the dust at his feet. Their life here was full of purpose and love. She had found her true family, her true calling, her true self. "There is nothing for me to go back to," she said. "But thank you for telling me the truth. It brings peace to an old wound." Hutchins nodded again, understanding more than his words could express. "You found your place," he observed. "Yes," she said simply. "I have." As the marshal rode away, Sarah Beth reflected on the strange path that had brought her to this moment. She had been condemned for poisoning water, only to discover that her true gift lay in purifying it. She had been rejected by one community for her differences, only to be embraced by another for those same qualities. She had lost everything she thought she wanted, only to gain everything she had never known she needed. That evening, as she sat with Standing Bear watching their children play in the golden desert light, Sarah Beth understood that love truly did transcend all boundaries. Boundaries of race, of culture, of expectation, and even of apparent tragedy. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the greatest losses, and sometimes we must lose ourselves completely in order to find who we were always meant to be. The waters that had nearly claimed her life had instead washed away everything false and unnecessary, leaving only what was true and eternal. In saving her from drowning, Standing Bear had given her far more than her life. He had given her the chance to discover that love, like water, finds its own level and flows toward where it is most needed. In the end, Sarah Beth realized, there are no coincidences in the great pattern of existence. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, creates ripples that travel farther than we can imagine. The water she had freely given to thirsty travelers had returned to save her when she needed it most, carrying with it a love that transformed not just her life, but her very understanding of what it means to be truly alive. Love, she had learned, does not recognize the artificial boundaries that divide us, boundaries of race, class, religion, or culture. It flows where it will, like water seeking its natural course, and when we stop fighting the current and learn to flow with it, we discover that we have found our way home.